Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining from many corners of the world. Today in this session, we'll be talking about tools to assess water insecurity. We're going to be hearing from experts on 3 different continents about tools that will help us to understand the drivers and the prevalence of water security across a range of contexts. And these tools are meant to empower robust decision-making around this incredibly important resource. So the panelists will each speak for approximately 5 minutes, and we'll have at least 15 minutes for question and answers at the end. You're welcome to pose questions in the chat function in Zoom. You can tweet them at me, or you can also email them to me here, and I'll field them and share them with the relevant person. So we're going to start with a presentation from GIZ-IWASP. This is with Lydia Ngonsi and Matt Parr. It takes a minute to set up each of these shares, but this should be it.
Hello everyone, my name is Lydia. We will be demonstrating how the scenario planning tool and the water security investment model can be used by decision makers to make informed investment decisions on water security. The presentation today aims to show how you would go about making investment decisions on water security in data-scarce areas with limited financial resources. The scenario planning tool is one of the 2 decision support tools developed to enable stakeholders to make informed investment decisions. The tool is designed in Microsoft Power BI, a free open source data visualization software available to stakeholders at no cost. Information in the scenario planning tool is generated by a suite of models run for a set of input scenarios that vary by time level and type of intervention. Currently, the scenario planning tool utilizes data generated by a suite of 5 models. We have a wetland model, a water quality model, a public health model, a flooding model, and an economics model. Stakeholders are at liberty to introduce new data into the scenario planning tool by upgrading existing models and/or introducing new models. Outputs from the scenario planning tool, as you may see on the screen, are visualized through maps, tables, and other forms of graphical presentations. So, how does the scenario planning tool enable stakeholders to make informed investment decisions on water security? First, the scenario planning tool presents information on the drivers of key water security threats and uses those drivers to project the future status of water security threats. This enables stakeholders to understand both the current and future state of water security at metropolitan scale and at catchment level. Using the example provided on the screen under the Wetland Cover tab, stakeholders are able to see the current status of wetlands, what is driving wetland cover change, and the projected future status of wetlands with or without intervention under climate change. With this kind of information, stakeholders are able to target interventions to mitigate specific water security threats. In addition to providing information on key water security threats, the scenario planning tool enables stakeholders to locate and scale water security interventions by allowing them to select interventions at various levels and to explore how the current and future status of water security would change under different interventions. Using the example provided on the screen under the Public Health tab, if decision makers in Greater Kampala metropolitan area, for example, were to invest in improving access to adequate sanitation for only 50% of the population currently without access, there would still be about 1.5 million people without access to water supply and sanitation. Over 450,000 cases of diarrhea will still continue to be reported per year, and the government will continue to spend about $4.6 million per year to treat diarrheal diseases. All this information is provided for in the scenario planning tool. What is the implication of this kind of decision? This kind of decision shows stakeholders that to improve the status of water security, they will have to invest both in water supply and sanitation, and secondly, they will have to target their investments to cover uncovered persons. Continued investment in covered areas, as shown on the scenario planning tool, will not bring about improved status of water security. To address or mitigate water security threats facing Greater Kampala metropolitan area requires heavy investment now and in the future. Selecting socially acceptable, economically viable, and impactful holistic solutions that address multiple water security threats requires that a systematic process is followed. The water security investment model is a multi-criteria decision analysis screening tool that utilizes an Excel-based platform to present information on the impact or benefits of undertaking certain investment actions, along with information on the characteristics of selected investment actions to allow stakeholders to make informed decisions about prioritization of investment projects. Ideally, the process involves formulating a long list of project ideas from multiple stakeholders and stakeholder groups, screening the long list to a short list using multi-criteria analysis and evaluation criteria generated by stakeholders, and consolidating the short list to form a selected list that would be then evaluated to understand the impact of each of the projects presented on that list. From the example on the screen, the water security investment model provides stakeholders with two types of scores. The water security impact score that shows benefits a given project would be able to deliver, and a feasibility score that shows the practicality of implementing a given project. The model also compares project costs and presents these in form of bubbles. As you may see on your right-hand side, the bigger the bubble, the higher the cost of the project. This information is presented in graphical form, allowing stakeholders to conceptualize the components of each project and comparing these components across multiple projects. The results of the water security investment model are not a recommendation, nor are they a ranking of projects. Rather, this information is provided to decision makers, enabling them to visualize it and to bring it into their decision-making process. The scenario planning tool and the water security investment model presented to you today on their own do not select high priority projects. Project selection requires stakeholders and decision makers to interact with the evidence to make the best choice of investment actions. Thank you.
Thanks, Lydia and Matt. I bring you now to the Netherlands with the Water Research Institute. This is a presentation by Jan Hofman, along with his colleagues Stef Kop and Kees van Leeuwen.
The approach is basically to help
start this from the beginning.
Help cities to be. This is the city blueprint approach, applied in 125 municipalities and regions worldwide. The approach is basically to help cities to become water wise, and we provide the baseline assessment after which cities have to do the visioning, the scenario building, the development of an action plan, and also the monitoring and evaluation. We have developed three frameworks. The first one is the Trends and Pressures framework to assess the city's main challenges. The second one is a city blueprint performance framework to assess the city's main challenges with regard to water management. And then last but not least, governance capacity analysis, where the city's water governance can be improved. The Trends and Pressures framework consists of 24 indicators divided over 4 categories: social, environmental, financial, and governance. And we score them from 0, no concern, to 10, serious concern. We do it in an interactive way with the stakeholders, and on the left you see the results of Dar es Salaam, showing that the city faces many challenges, and then Melbourne, showing that the city faces less challenges but still many challenges to deal with. The second framework is the City Blueprint Performance Framework. That consists of 24 indicators as well, divided over 7 categories. We included solid waste because it's very important in water management in general. We score from 0, which is a concern, to 10, which is no concern, and the geometric mean of the 24 indicators is calculated, and we call it the Blue City Index, and it also varies from 0 to 10. Examples on the left: Dar es Salaam with a Blue City Index of 1.3, Melbourne on the right with a Blue City Index of 5.4, Amsterdam with a Blue City Index of 8.3, the best performing city so far, but it has a long tradition to deal with water that goes far back to over 2 centuries. When we combine all the best scores of all the cities, we get a nearly blue city. It basically means that techniques are available currently to improve cities, and that it is mainly a matter of planning and implementation and monitoring. These are the overall results of all the cities we have assessed, and we have divided them in 4 categories as shown on this slide. What factors account for water wisdom? We do that with the governance capacity analysis that is centered around 5 water challenges: flood risk, urban heat islands, water scarcity, wastewater treatment, and solid waste processing. We have done it for water reuse as well, but most of our studies were limited to these 5 challenges. We do it with 27 indicators divided over 3 dimensions and 9 conditions. We start with a literature study of the 27 indicators, after which we do in-depth interviews, after which we allow the stakeholders to provide feedback on the scoring and to clarify issues. The results for Amsterdam for the 5 water challenges are summarized in this graph. It shows that Amsterdam can improve on community knowledge, information transparency, local sense of urgency, and the consumer willingness to pay. We focus on flood risk. Everything is pretty much in good shape, but that is also logical because in 1953, 2,000 people lost their lives after a major flood event in the Netherlands. So we have a clear policy response to that. When it comes to urban heat island effects, there's still a lot of things to improve, but after a couple of hot summers in the Netherlands, the politicians cannot deny that anymore. These are the cities for which we have also assessed water governance capacity. And here are the papers that we published in open access literature, where you can find the details of our approach. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Jan. So now from Uganda to the Netherlands, we go to Chicago, where if you listen really carefully, you can hear my cat annoying me during this presentation. Once I pull it up. Okay, here we go. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here today to talk with you about the first cross-culturally valid way to measure experiences of water insecurity. Now, in the course of these 5 minutes, I'm going to answer 3 questions. The first of which is, what is this HWISE scale? So to tell you about this, I need to tell you that I am trained in nutrition, and I was studying nutrition in Kenya when we asked women, what shapes how you feed your infant? And much to my surprise, I got pictures like this of women discussing how they either had to buy water or buy food. They couldn't afford both, and if they bought food, they would be forced to use the sewage-filled water to prepare food with. Well, I was very interested in measuring water insecurity experiences, and I went to the literature to find how we could do that. Turns out there are many ways of measuring water security, but water insecurity experiences have not typically been measured. If we think about the 4 domains of water security, which are availability, accessibility, acceptability in use, and reliability across time, well, we're very good at measuring physical availability of water. We can also measure infrastructure pretty well using JMP's drinking water ladder. There are lots of ways of measuring chemical and microbiological contaminants of water, but when we look at the sort of access and use domains, those are hard to measure. We're left with a big black box. The UN has recognized that there's a big need for higher resolution data. They talk about how you can't manage what you can't measure in the Water Action Decade Report. Major gaps exist. I therefore pulled together this consortium of scholars across many disciplines and across many continents. We're calling it the Household Water Insecurity Experiences Consortium. And what we did is we aimed to find a way to measure household water insecurity experiences in a cross-culturally equivalent way. We took candidate items of questions that we thought would work, 32 of them, and we trialed them across the world. Ultimately, we implemented them in 28 sites in more than 8,000 households. And these sites were selected to really get a range of climate, of infrastructure, problems with water, too much, too little, low quality. We did a lot of statistics in order that I won't bore you with, but if you scan this QR code, you can read more about how we developed this scale and how we took it from 32 items in the course of statistics and meetings like this with site PIs from around the world to 12 items. And those items are like this. How often in the last 4 weeks have you worried about water? Has your supply been interrupted, been unable to wash clothes, etc.? Now this scale takes 3 minutes to administer. The response options are never, rarely, sometimes, or often. And each of those 12 items are scored from 0, never, to often, always, 3, such that the range is 36. You simply sum those scores, and that's your water insecurity score. Now we can also look at the prevalence of household water insecurity by looking at the proportion of water insecurity households with scores greater than 12. So just to give you a sense from some of those sites in which we implemented this scale, there's a great range in water insecurity. So what has the HWISE scale told us already? It's early days. The scale was only finalized in 2019, but we're learning that household water insecurity shapes many aspects of life, including mental health. The depression and stress associated with water insecurity is, I can only say, shocking. You'll hear more about physical health from the Oxfam presentation that's coming up next. The relationship between food and water insecurity is really striking. In fact, we have some of the first longitudinal data showing water insecurity predicts subsequent food insecurity. And of course, the impacts on economic productivity between water costs and time and opportunity costs is indubitable. In terms of COVID-19, which is on everyone's mind, we found that 1/4 of households were unable to wash hands due to problems with water. And that was in 2018, well before COVID was on our minds. So all this is to say is HWISE has told us a lot. And it can tell us a lot in metropolitan settings. So it can be used at multiple levels, for example, to identify prevalence and identify at-risk populations in a city or in a country. I'm so excited to be collaborating with Gallup World Polls and UNESCO this year. We're going to be collecting the first nationally representative data about water insecurity throughout all of Africa, India, and we've since added China, Brazil, and Bangladesh. At the community level, we can look at the impacts of interventions or shocks. These can be economic shocks or climate shocks. And a number of agencies are already implementing HWISE to look at the impact of their interventions. We can also use HWISE to understand the consequences for well-being. And this is happening in Nepal with USAID. IPA is doing this in Ghana. IFPRI has used the shorter form, the HWISE short form, to look at the impacts of COVID in West Africa. So in sum, I've laid out to you what the HWISE scale is. You can read more about it here. This is an implementation manual. The HWISE scale has already told us about the myriad impacts of water insecurity in surprising ways we didn't see coming. And lastly, there are a number of ways that HWISE scale can be used to understand the prevalence, to target resources, and understand impacts of interventions. With that, I would thank my funders and collaborators and turn it over to our next presenter. Thanks, everyone. And I must apologize. I didn't realize the cat was that loud on the recording. So if anyone wants her, her name is Luna, and I'll send her to you. Up next, we have Chad Staton from the University of Western England will be talking to us about some ways to make using HWISE a little bit easier.
Hello everyone. In the next 5 or 6 minutes, I'd like to introduce you to a free at the point of use open source solution for organizing, analyzing, and visualizing data from the HWISE survey applied anywhere in the world. This software platform has been developed by my colleagues Jasmine Blackford, Victoria Dunn, Tanti Octavianti, Deirdre Tour, and myself at the University of the West of England in Bristol, UK. I'll introduce the open source visualizer and talk a little bit about how it's structured and how it operates. I'll then show you some sample outputs based on a data set collected in southwestern Uganda in summer 2019 and conclude by talking about some of the avenues for future development. Shortly after HWISE data began to roll in about 3 years ago, it became obvious that the challenges of organizing, analyzing, and visualizing data can be quite daunting, particularly for non-specialist, non-academic users. There are also challenges of cost, since some of the common software platforms used, such as SPSS and Stata for statistical analysis and Tableau for visualization, are commercial and quite expensive. For this reason, we sought an open source, free at the point of use software solution for solving these HWISE data analysis and visualization challenges. R is an open source integrated software platform that has been going rapidly around the world in recent years. It can do pretty much everything any commercial software package can do, and it has a global user community who are generally very helpful and receptive when approached with questions about specific application domains. So we began by developing a package within R that would import HWISE data as CSV or XLSX files, Excel files. I'll now ask my colleague Jasmine to talk a little bit more about how the drop-down menu system works.
So once the file has been uploaded, you can see it says upload complete here, and the data and the file will also appear here on your right hand side. So here I've got a dictionary in my first sheet in the spreadsheet, and then my data's in the second one, so I'm going to change the sheet over here, and you can see the data pops up there. And then I'm going to go across to the summary tab. This gives you a summary table of the two different variables you've selected over here. So here, for example, 0 is male. So you can see that the minimum age of males in the survey was 26. You can also see that how many missing entries there are for each column as well. Again, you can choose different ones here if you wanted to. So let's go for ST7 here. This, for example, says that 36 females chose 1 for the SD7 question. Then if you go across to the plot tab, you can do some plots. So here, this gives you a box plot of gender against SD6. You can see that the distribution is roughly the same for females as it is for males. But you can see that the plot changes with whatever variable you're using at the time. You could change this one as well if you so chose. So let's do a sensible one. There we go. So you can see there's a lot more box plots there. This will occasionally give you scatter plots if it is more applicable for the data.
Thanks, Jasmine. I'd now like to show you a few more visualizations based on a new dataset collected in the southwestern Ugandan district of Kisoro in July 2019. This is what we call a box and whisker plot representation, and it shows average HWISE scores as the thick vertical black bars for each of several different primary sources of drinking water. And as you can see from this XY plot, box and whisker plot, more infrastructural sources of household water are correlated with lower levels of water insecurity, and less developed, less improved sources of household drinking water are correlated with higher levels of water insecurity. Although it is clear from this representation that it is not a simple set of relationships. Similarly, if we look at interval data, in this case income data, we also find that the relationship between income and HWISE score is not simple either. In this case, so for the future, we plan on developing the visualizer in the following ways. We're currently working on a module for automating the data importation, cleaning, and loading process to make that process easier and less coding dependent. Second, we're improving the set of drop-down menus to make them more user-friendly and aesthetic. And third, we're working on ways of linking HWISE data to other kinds of third-party data, including meteorological and hydrological data. In this case, for example, we'd be interested to know if the representations in the box and whisker plots on the left that show reported months of water insecurity correlate with the meteorological data about rainfall or hydrological data about river flows and open water body levels. Thank you very much for listening, and we'd love to hear from you about the kinds of functionality you'd like to see in an open source solution to organizing, exploring, analyzing, and representing HWISE water insecurity data. Thanks again.
Thanks for that, Chad. I now bring you to Oxfam GB, talking about some of their experiences in Zambia and the DRC.
I'm an impact evaluation advisor with Oxfam, and today I'm going to share a few simple tools that we've been using to evaluate the impact of our programs and also understand how change happens. I'm going to do this through an example of a multi-site analysis looking at water insecurity, good governance, and well-being in Zambia and DRC. First, to give a bit of background on how this analysis came about, Oxfam has what we call effectiveness reviews, which are systematic impact evaluations, and we do these as a random selection across all of our projects each year by theme. There are 5 themes you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, and today we'll focus on a couple of effectiveness reviews that were carried out under the sustainable water theme. And to date, we have published over 75 reviews since 2011. The two effectiveness reviews I'll be focusing on today were carried out in 2018 and 2019 in Zambia and DRC. In Zambia, we were evaluating an urban wash program, and in DRC, we were evaluating a sustainable wash in fragile contexts program. In both cases, we carried out around 1,000 household interviews and spoke with approximately half men and half women. For each of the effectiveness reviews, we looked at project impact using Oxfam's Sustainable Water and Sanitation Index, which is a slightly more complex tool, and it will be published together with the evaluation reports. And it looks across 6 dimensions, including water insecurity, equity, institutions, operations, well-being, and the environment. But today I really want to focus on what we've done as a secondary analysis with some of these data. So first, we took a few questions from the equity and institution dimensions and formed a simple water governance scale. We also had data on water insecurity using the HWISE scale. And then we took a few key outcome indicators around well-being. So looking at things like safe water provision, life satisfaction, health, such as diarrhea and cholera. And so this allows us to look across the community, household, and individual levels. In terms of what we learned about these relationships, after controlling for wealth and drinking water service level, among other factors, we find that good water governance is associated with lower water insecurity. It's also associated with better well-being outcomes, including increased life satisfaction and reduced severity of cholera outbreak. Water insecurity is also associated with better well-being outcomes, including reduced diarrhea and reduced severity of cholera outbreak. And good water governance is also indirectly associated with these same well-being outcomes. So overall, we learned that good water governance does predict higher individual well-being, and this happens directly as well as indirectly through lower water insecurity. So you can see that these tools have really provided valuable insights. In conclusion, these simple tools have really helped us better understand how change happens. In particular, the HWISE and water governance scales are really easy to use and are highly recommended to others. And Oxfam plans to continue using these tools alongside our own index for things like targeting, evaluating, and understanding. I can't finish without saying that this is the product of many. And in particular, I want to thank the evaluation participants and all of the other people who have been involved in the effectiveness reviews and developing these tools, and in particular the HWISE network, especially my co-authors Sarah, Josh, and Chad. For more information, you can use the camera on your phone to scan the QR code in the upper right-hand corner of this slide. That will link you to the resources shown here and also a copy of this presentation. I hope you found this useful, and I look forward to your questions and the discussion during the session.
Fantastic. So you've now seen sort of at least 5 tools that hopefully at least one of them will be useful to you in your work. What we're going to do now is Alexandros Makariagakis from UNESCO IHP is going to pull this all together, sum it up for us, and take us to a higher ground. I think he's going to do that. Let's see. Here we go.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to take the virtual floor following the introduction of these very innovative tools by our colleagues from GIZ, KWA, and Northwestern University. Today, I'm here to discuss about the implementation of these tools at a global scale and policy implications. UNESCO's World Water Assessment Program compiled the SDG 6 synthesis report on behalf of UN Water in 2018. The report states clearly that we are not on track to meet the goals set by governments 5 years ago. In particular, 844 million people still lack even a basic water service, whereas 2.3 billion people still lack basic sanitation services. Furthermore, 2.1 billion people lack water access on premises, available when needed and free from contamination, in other words, safely managed drinking water, and 4.5 billion people worldwide lack of a safely managed sanitation service. 2020 World Water Development Report stated that 4.2 out of the 7.6 billion people lived in cities in 2018. Projections of human settlements in the future show that up to 60% of the world's population will live in cities by 2030. This population is projected to be 8.6 billion people. Thus, the statistics show clearly that if one wishes to meet the SDGs, one needs to start with cities. The current pandemic posed additional limitations to the boundary conditions, restricting the capability of officials and utilities to deliver the required water and sanitation services in a sustainable manner. So what do we do and how we do it? From our colleagues in KWR, how we can assess integrated urban water management using the city blueprint and governance framework. The city blueprint framework can be used to create a baseline as to where the city is and utilize this baseline to monitoring the progress of any activities that are being taken up in order to ameliorate the situation. The governance framework can help to identify institutional gaps that also need to be addressed when you're trying to improve the situation. We are currently working with KWR and implementing the framework in 6 African capitals and have started an awareness-raising campaign to ensure that the results of the research will be taken up among city officials and donors in the countries in order to build the necessary infrastructure and improve the situation. We have plans to expand the work to all African capitals and start a wave of science-based decision-making process on the way that funds can be allocated at city level. We have embarked with Northwestern University and Gallup to pursue a very innovative approach in measuring water insecurity at household level. The Northwestern University colleagues explain the HWISE tool that can identify water insecurity at household level. But why UNESCO and what is water security? Water security is the capacity of a population to safeguard access to adequate quantities of water of acceptable quality for sustaining human and ecosystem health on a watershed basis, and to ensure efficient protection of life and property against water-related hazards. This is also the core of UNESCO's 8th strategic framework, where we look at water security in issues of water-related disasters, groundwater, water quality and water scarcity, water for human settlements, eco-hydrology and water education. Now back to the HWISE scale, and how can this help to advance SDG priorities? By implementing the scale, we can recognize drivers. The drivers can either have to do with the nutrition of the people, their health, their psychological situation, and their financial status. But what do you do with all this information when you have it? You need to reach the policy and decision makers. UNESCO's intergovernmental program brings together over 70 countries every 2 years during the Intergovernmental Council of IHP. Similarly, we organize regional meetings. At the global level, once every 2 years, we organize a meeting for water-related ministers. And we aim to present the tool to them in October 2020 during the 24th session of the Governmental Council of IHP. Similarly, at regional level, we aim to diffuse the results to governmental officials in order to get their interest in expanding the implementation of the tool at country level. UNESCO, as the scientific UNESCO as the scientific arm of the United Nations family.
Pretend I'm Alex for a minute. So the takeaway messages here are that SDG 6 won't be reached with business as usual. And the SDG 6 Global Acceleration Framework calls for optimized financing, improved data and information, capacity development, innovation, and governance. I think Alex is saying he's very excited for Gallup World Polls to be implementing the HWISE scale. So we'll be having benchmarks, first national benchmarks of water insecurity, and also to be expanding cooperation with KWR and the University of Bath. One of the outcomes that we've talked about as a panel that we'd like to come from this session is to pull these tools together in some sort of knowledge platform or toolkit to have like a home, a launching point for those of us who are interested in tools. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the illustrious Andy Roby. He is with UK Aid. He leads their water program there. Let me see if I can unmute him.
I think I'm unmuted already.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, thank you.
I just love all the animal noises in the background on the various videos, and I'd just like to recommend this for further webinars. Amusing. And my dog has been locked out of this room because she barks, and unfortunately is of an age where she makes horrible smells as well, which you won't appreciate at all. I hope. Yeah, the cicadas. I don't know where you are, Alexandros. Are you somewhere in Greece? Fantastic. Anyway, onto the serious stuff. I'm really excited about what I've heard as a donor, and happy to have the UK Aid flag put against HWISE, and I'm sure we've been supporting some of this other work in other ways I'm not familiar with. My background is actually forestry, and I've been doing this job for just over a year, replacing Jean-Paul Penrose, who some of you will know. My background on forestry told me some important things that I just wanted to quickly relay to you. We struggled for years to get work done in forestry and to attract the attention of politicians and the people that matter, and realized that there were few technical answers. These were political issues that you needed to get the politicians' attention on. So my challenge in this session really is to say, you know, what difference can these indicators make? In Indonesia, where I worked for 9 years, indeed 15 years in total, we had some desperate situations where like 80% of all timber exports were illegal. And we managed to switch it around by getting business, civil society, and government together at the same time. But to start it all off, we needed political space. So I was really excited to hear about this work being presented to ministers anywhere, whether that's SWA or in other fora. I know, however, because I've been in this political environment for a long time, that ministers can soon lose focus if it's not important for them in terms of their careers or to the people of the country they're governing. So, you know, I guess what I'm asking is, Alexandros, is this all falling into place? Does it need more than gravity and the work of you great people? And what in particular should donors like DFID be doing? What should the UK government be doing in our position as a lobbyist? And I would draw attention to what my minister said on Monday at the speech which I wrote for him, which is, we acknowledge that in spite of growing water insecurity around the world, there is very little accountability and transparency in relation to the global water crisis, and that needs addressing urgently. And one of these ways is through smarter indicators. Hence, we talked about HWISE and the new consortium, Alexandros, that you were describing so well. I'm really interested in these water governance indicators, these ways of combining indicators, and I would also ask you to look outside of the water sector into the world of ease of doing business. Investors are incredibly influential, and businesses are too. When businesses are deciding whether to come into a country, wouldn't it be great if they were asking what the water security situation was? Because that will affect everything that they do. We know that this is a big business risk. I don't think many of them do. Should we be working more on the climate change agenda and the task force for climate relevant financial disclosure, for instance? You're already working with Gallup, which is great. And I love the visualization work, and the way you communicate is one way of doing that, but you've got to get to the grassroots and you've got to get people engaged in this so that ultimately water insecurity is a political issue. I think that's probably enough from me for now, Sarah, and I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Andy. I think you had actually posed a question to Alex. It was a really hard one, so let's see what he has to say.
So first of all, let me agree with Andy. There is a lot about policy and politics that need to come in for being water secure, and that's for sure. And that is our role also. That's where we want to make a difference. We want to get these beautiful tools and make sure that they are being used, first of all. And we want to make sure, though, that water security becomes part of our everyday discussions, right? Up to now, unfortunately, if you see across all globally agreed goals and agreements and everything, water security is lacking from the vocabulary, right? We don't have the water security as a term in these. So what we hope to do, and also, Sarah, thank you very much for reading the last slide. Apologies for not having a good recording on that, is to launch a platform where we pick up great tools like these, and they're readily available for all the scientific world that would like to now expand their implementation. And what could you, Andy, do actually, and others, would be basically all the donor community should realize that there are these tools there and help expand the implementation of these tools. You know, so we have tools that have been peer reviewed, they have been implemented at global scale, but not to the scale that we need. So what we want to do is we want to have an open call to everyone to come join us at this platform and pick the tool that it fits better in the situation. We heard from Matthew and also our colleague GIZ for a more bigger screen on the Metropolitan scale, and then start the implementation. With the implementation of these tools, I've seen that we can then drive policy. The city blueprint framework is very good at city level. The HWISE scale is also in any, it can identify even pockets within a small city to identify where you're going to go with your policy and finances. So please join us in this effort to actually expand the implementation of these tools. Like I said, they have been reviewed, they have been implemented at global scale, they have been tested basically. So we know they're good. And we know that right now the indicators we have are difficult to collect, the information. They're not at the level that we want. We need some innovation to come in order to have the SDG acceleration framework happen. So thank you for the opportunity to actually have this open call. That was something that I wanted to do anyway. And please be alert, because after discussion with the group and others, we will be launching the platform soon, where this will be available, and also for discussion for further implementation.
Thank you. So I would ask the audience if any of you have tools that you would like to see included in this toolkit/platform, to please chat them into this or email me, sarah.young@northwestern.edu. There are a couple of folks with hands raised to ask questions. Audio can be really undependable. So if you could type your questions in, we'd be glad to field them. Great. So I'll open it up now to the panelists if we have questions or cross-cutting comments or observations across the presentations. one that I observed was in the work of KWR and Oxfam. Both of you talked about governance and you sort of looked at how governance was going. I wondered if you could each say a little bit more about how governance was measured, maybe starting with KWR, water governance, that is.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, we have developed a framework, and the work has actually been done by Stef Koop, my colleague, together with the University of Utrecht, the Copernicus Institute for Sustainable Development. And we have developed a framework, with 3 big categories: knowing, wanting, and willing, and subdivided that in 9 categories, and then 27 indicators. And what we do, and we have shortly touched upon that, is to interview people and to score the governance capacity on a scale from a 5-point scale, from minus, 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 0, plus, and double plus. So a Likert scale. And then we do that for all the 5 water challenges, and we have also done that for water reuse in 1 city in Spain. And it provides us a very, I would say, very clear view on what the governance capacities are. And Andy talked about the economic role and the relevance of water, and I want to echo that. It is actually the Secretary General of OECD who has made a very clear statement that without water security, there will not be any economic growth. So if you do not handle water security in a good manner, then you are really in problems with your, let's say, economic progress. And the other thing to say is that it's based on our own work, but it's also based on many studies done by the OECD Water Governance Group, that they came to the conclusion many times there are no water crises, but water governance crisis. And that brings me, of course, back to the points that have been raised by Andy and also by Alexandras. That's very much a political issue. Now, on the political issue and water, I want to add one, I would say, open door comment. It's not a thing that a professor should say, but I mean, water infrastructure is the most expensive infrastructure in cities. And politically, it is not so much, in the spotlight, because much of our water infrastructure is underground. It's not visible. It is hidden away from people. Even worse, if you go to cities that are performing poor on water, you see also that the canals and the rivers are hidden from the public. On the contrary, when you look at very attractive cities like Melbourne, Amsterdam, Helsinki, Hamburg, their water is a very important component of a city. People, do the recreation there. They love to walk around the water, to drink a beer along the canals, to see the sports on the rivers. So these are attractive cities. And so I think it is a very long-term challenge to keep water on the agenda. And my last comment is that we are now doing a study on Amsterdam, and Amsterdam has a very long tradition with water. And actually that goes back 2-3 centuries. And if you look at the history of Amsterdam, it has been driven by catastrophes, bad drinking water, people dying of diarrhea, then sewer problems with stinking canals, then canals filled up with solid waste, and so on, and so on, and so on. So politicians should also understand that it is a long-term challenge to deal with water. And for now, I give the floor to you back, Sarah, and to the other panelists.
Thanks so much. So lots of great points, and your comments have generated quite some discussion in chat. Janie, could you compare and contrast the governance, the way that Oxfam GB measured governance in DRC and Zambia, and I know some other countries around the world?
Yeah, so what we're doing is a bit different because it's looking at the household level to align with the HWISE scale, which is also measured at the household level, which we're doing through household surveys. And so looking at it from a different angle. What we're doing is we have a set, at least in the paper, which was linked in the presentation, and I think I can also share it in a minute in the chat. It describes the questions that we use. So it uses 12 questions in the household survey, and it covers areas including trust, equity, transparency, accountability, and adaptability. And this is all from the perspective of the household member answering those questions in terms of their confidence in different governance systems, how they perceive equity of the WaSH systems, etc. And so then based on those questions, we come up with a score between 0 and 12. And that's how we looked at the relationship between HWISE and governance in the presentation. Yeah.
In case with your work, who were the respondents? Were those key informants, or who were evaluating the governance capacity?
We start with a selection of the stakeholders. That is a non-governmental organization, but also the managers of the cities, utilities, political people. And then we do the interviews. And then once the interviews are done, and many of the interviews are actually done by master students of Utrecht University. And then most of the time, I would say almost always, staff is doing the peer review of the governance scoring. So there is we have done this because we want to have a consequent way of scoring. We have written down all the questionnaires, so not only for the governance capacity framework, but also for trends and pressures and for the city blueprint framework. We have listed all the questions. We have given the sources of information where you can find the data, and we have provided the calculation methods in great detail. So each framework has a guidance document or a questionnaire that is about 35 pages. And the reason why we do that, is not only to help our students to do a consistent analysis, but it's also to help ourselves, because there is a lot of development in the field, and sometimes there are comments on indicators, or there are new ways of doing things, and we try to update our questionnaire. So these are kind of living documents, and this is the way we do it. So it provides us with a kind of quality check on the data that we collect.
Great. I mean, I believe you're trained as a bench scientist, but you're certainly speaking like a social scientist. That's fantastic.
Okay, thanks.
Let me open it up to our panelists for maybe 2 more discussion points or questions. Jan, was that a hand raise?
Yes, I would like to add a thing to the discussion here, and I think that's about the importance of having these indicators or indicator frameworks. And that is that once you have an indicator framework, you can also set up a benchmark system with the different sites you are applying them. And what you see, for instance, with the city blueprint methodology, which is now applied, I think, over 120 cities throughout the world, you can make a comparison on how well a city is performing on specific topics, and that creates an incentive for a city to improve. And I think that's basically where indicators are important for. So without having a benchmark, yeah, you get a number from an indicator, and you don't know whether that number is high or low or what to do with it. So this benchmarking and creating more and more data for comparing the benchmark, that's what is creating the incentive for cities or stakeholders to improve things, and that's how you can make the connection, I think, to the governance questions.
Right, Jan, on that note, how many times have you done repeated measures in the same city?
I don't think we have done many repeated measurements in the same city. I think but I think Kees can answer that better. I think it would be great to see if there is an improvement of the indicator over time. So if you have done a city blueprint 10 years ago and do it now in the same city, can you see a difference? I don't know that, but perhaps Kees can comment on that.
Thank you for the question. Yes, we have not done that for many cities yet, because Steph and I were occupied with our students to do all the assessments in all the other cities in the world, to exactly do what Jan said, to make a comparison. But we are doing this now for Amsterdam, and we have done it already. But in the case of our master student working in Amsterdam, Sana, she is doing work that goes back 2 centuries. The reason why we make that paper is that, you know, we do not want to say, well, we are the best. The real meaning of the whole project that we are doing in Amsterdam is to show that it is a long-term challenge to deal with water in a city. And so that is what we want to do in the current study. So we look back 2-3 centuries over time on water management and water governance in Amsterdam. One other thing to add, actually 2 things, is when you do a consistent analysis of cities or municipalities, you can not only provide a comparison, but it also allows cities to contact each other. So it is also a basis for city-to-city learning, and that is, I think, very important. And we also try to share the information and visualize the indicators in a very simple manner with our spider diagram. So that really works. But we want to do that, and we actually hope that cities are going to do it themselves. And we are really very happy with the idea to develop a platform where we can put all the methodologies. And I would like to add that for our work, we would like to share the methodologies, and we like people to do the assessments. But in all cases, we will review the data in order to keep our full database, you know, in good shape. Because there are also, I would say, possibilities to be a little bit too positive with regard to water management. And it's important to have a fair baseline assessment, as what Alexandra said, to work from there and to see where you can improve. And on the improvement, and that is my last point, on the improvement, that is totally a political decision. Whether mayors want to spend all their money on flood protection, that is a political choice. We provide them with a baseline assessment, which they can take into consideration when making further plans and assessments. But in the end, it is a political decision what mayors or ministers do with the assessment. Thank you.
Okay, so I appreciate your commitment to real news as opposed to fake news. Thank you.
Yeah.
One last point from the panelists, perhaps? Andy.
Well, if it's a last point, love having the last word. I just was going to say, well, 2 things. I'm really excited about all you guys are doing, and I'm very impressed with what I've learnt through this session. And I think the toolkit coming together is a great process, because I think it will be horses for courses, and the pros and cons of each tool, if you like. We need to combine the strengths and neutralize the weaknesses, as they say. But let's grab the moment, because we're in the middle of this pandemic. The pandemic means building back better in the end. We'll come out of it. And there will be a stronger focus on climate change and green growth. And that means doing things differently. And I think we can possibly, this is the moment for water. This is the moment to crack on with it. And I think getting those indicators in at the top level is what is going to be really important. I'll do my bit, and I'm sure other donors, you know, sort of armed with all of these tools, I think we can go into bat for you. Thanks.
Well, fantastic. I want to thank everyone who was up very early on this side, especially our IT guy who was here at 5 a.m. And thank you, Carrie Mark. And thanks to all the panelists and to those of you who have joined us from around the world. This was a robust discussion in the midst of a lot of other competing talks. So thank you all. And this will be posted on YouTube within 24 hours. With that, I thank you and have a fantastic day. Let me figure out if I can figure out how to close this. Thank you all. And if the panelists are staying on, that would be fantastic.
Thank you all.